Welcome friends, new and old. We are back discussing Star Trek this week with the brand new episode of Star Trek Lower Decks Season 4. It is called Twovix. Now I do realize they released 2 episodes. I purposely, or probably actually unintentionally only watched the first episode forgetting there were 2. However, that's beneficial because I do intend to try and cover these separately and distinctly. This being Lower Decks, I mean, there isn't as much meat on the bone as a longer form, more serious Star Trek show, so I don't expect these to be very long, but you have been warned there will be spoilers ahead for as much as that means to you, so duck out now if that's not your thing. Otherwise, we're cracking on to the Season 4 premiere, the Voyager celebration episode entitled Twovix. If you aren't aware, my prior thoughts on Star Trek Lower Decks, I tend to think of Lower Decks as a television show within the world of Star Trek. That is to say, the zanier, wackier, more out there things aren't necessarily taking place 100% within the universe of Star Trek, and anything that is reminiscent of characters or things that have happened are kind of a dramatization of real world events. When we have characters show up like Will Riker or something like that, it is the Will Riker from the Star Trek universe being like a celebrity cameo voicing himself or something. I know that's very convoluted, I just wanted to touch on that. This episode being the celebration of Voyager, I was very interested and I was very excited. It is still one of my favorite Star Trek series. It may even be my most favorite because it's my comfort food of Star Trek, I guess. It's one of the places I like to go back to and revisit as much as possible. So this episode had a lot to live up to, and it kind of delivered, but I think what it delivered on was more, and I don't know if this was intentional or not, but Janeway-centric command decisions or controversial decisions, but I'll touch on that a little bit later. The main point of this episode is that the Voyager was becoming a museum in and of itself. A nice callback to Voyager Endgame.
Voyager's in a museum. Voyager is a museum on the grounds of the Presidio.
And kind of tying it into Picard Season 3. So it was a nice touch here to kind of mesh those two things by saying it's going to start out life on the ground in California, and then eventually it will be put back into space. It will stay a museum in both places, but we are seeing the opening, the commissioning, the very first outing of Voyager as a museum, and of course some things go wrong. Now I need to get in my mindset here of this being Lower Decks again, coming off of Strange New Worlds, because there were things in this episode that completely didn't really make sense and kind of blew logic out of the airlock. That's fine. This doesn't necessarily really have to make sense in that way. We also got some character moments in this episode with all of our Lower Deckers, aside from Rutherford getting promotions. We actually get surprised, and Tendi, the new character, T'Lyn, got a field promotion sort of kind of thing. I'm not entirely sure how that works. Mariner gets a promotion against all of her feelings. She doesn't want it. I guess that was a good point to start the season on. That part made sense. The whole Voyager of it all, while I like it, seemed a bit of an odd choice for a premiere, similar to how Star Trek Strange New Worlds last season premiered on an episode that didn't necessarily feel like a premiere. I just wish there was a little bit more carryover, I guess, from the events that ended last season, a little bit more wrapping things up instead of feeling like this was just another episode in a long line of episodes. But we did kind of get a little bit at the end of the episode here of the overarching story we know is going on. I'm kind of glad it wasn't exceptionally overdone, and I'm hoping we don't get every single episode dealing with this, because this is a very short show compared to other Star Trek series, so to be spending so much time with a serialized mystery and disaster type thing might just feel a little unearned and a little bit taken out of place. But going over some new added elements here, we got in the intro, in addition to that battle between the Romulans and the Borg and all of that stuff, the crystalline entity, we now also have the whale probe from Star Trek 4, which I thought was very fitting because this is the 4th season of Star Trek Lower Decks, and they were kind of teasing each season with a recreation or an homage to the original series movies, so it really does make sense to have that whale probe added here. And the Voyager stuff in this episode I thought was great. I just didn't think they necessarily went all the way, if that makes sense. And like I said, a lot of the homages in this episode seem to all be linked to, and I don't want to say questionable decisions by Janeway, but just more of the standout situations for Janeway. Maybe they were controversial, maybe they weren't. Obviously, with Twovix being the main narrative of this episode and the one that it was named after, clearly that's setting the bar for this. We did get a little subplot going on where the petal from the Orchid actually fell off and got entangled in the transporter. So I guess I have to kind of take back my statement when I went over the episode titles. That kind of controversial character that was created when Neelix and Tuvok and a space alien Orchid were all combined in the transporter into a brand new being. Yes, I do want to address the Orchid because there were 3 life forms that created that character. It was a very, very heavy plot element here, so I do have to give kudos to them for that. But what happens is it accidentally combines 2 of the officers. Phillips and the Doctor, they become a new combined life form.
There's only one pattern.
They go back into Janeway's service record, find out that she murdered Twovix, and this new life form isn't having that, so it kind of takes things into its own hands and forces the rest of the crew to become merged life forms, and then eventually the new cadet. Is she a cadet? I'm not really sure because she's on loan from the Vulcan High Command, so whatever she is, T'Lyn, she comes to the conclusion that she transports them all to the brig. They become one amalgamated creature, and they're able to take them apart later because they use the genetic differences and personality differences. That is the saving grace, the saving of the day, and all that stuff. That out of the way, back to all of the Voyager cameos, although I'm not sure you can call a lot of them cameos since I don't think they were voiced by the original people, but we get holograms of Chaotica, the clown evil thing from the Thaw, which wasn't a hologram, but they actually addressed that, so I'm going to give it a pass. And Michael Sullivan from the creepy Fairhaven, Janeway deletes all of his subroutines so that she can be with him even though he has a wife. Those were nice inclusions. The macrovirus was also in this episode.
Look out!
As well as some Borg stuff, some salamander babies from Threshold. So if you take a look at all of these, you have Twovix, who is kind of that whole controversy of did she murder him, whatever. Then you have Michael Sullivan, which was controversial because she deleted his subroutines, basically because she wanted to bang him.
Delete the wife. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Sullivan.
Then you have the clown from the Thaw, which I don't necessarily look at that as a controversial move, but it was kind of one of the pivotal ways that Janeway got them out of a mess. It was a very, very dark episode, if you want to call it that.
I'm afraid.
I know.
Then you have Threshold, where they evolved into futuristic human salamander things. And they had children, she and Tom Paris, in their salamander forms, and they abandoned the children on a planet. So all of these things, plus I guess you could even throw in there with all the little Borg elements that she made the deal with the devil, with the Borg back in Scorpion, and a couple of other times actually. And then you have the macrovirus, which I wouldn't necessarily call a controversial Janeway motive or a controversial Janeway episode, but it was the one where she went all commando and she was very Ellen Ripley with her, just her vest and her gun and stuff. So that was a very standout episode of Janeway as well. There's probably a couple others in here that I'm forgetting about, but it did seem like this was more of a Janeway's decisions episode being showcased than an overall let's celebrate Voyager as a whole, and especially since they were using Janeway's decisions, at least Captain Freeman was, as this stand-up kind of thing, that it seems like this was more of an exploration of the Janeway we saw in Voyager than Voyager in and of itself. There were a lot of other references like Neelix and his cheese, and there were a lot of stand-in, or a mannequin, I guess, Tom Paris. They mentioned Chakotay. I'm not sure they ever mentioned B'Elanna. Obviously, they mentioned 7 of 9 with the Borg alcoves and the nanoprobes. So that was also interesting. And the part that kind of broke the immersion, but I'm okay with it because this is Lower Decks, they found a dormant macrovirus behind some bioneural circuitry. They also found a dormant Borg nanoprobe that they missed on the cleanup. And because it attached to the macrovirus, it became macro as well.
What the hell is that?
It's a Borg nanite! We must have missed one!
Ended up assimilating the little Threshold robots as well as kind of taking over the holograms. Oh, I completely forgot Chaotica. He was the other one. That's, again, not necessarily a controversial Janeway moment, but having her as the bride of Chaotica, the Arachnia queen of the spider people, another standout moment.
Your Majesty seems overly concerned with romantic matters when there's a battle to be won. That is why you asked me here.
It all leads back to this being a celebration, or at least an exploration of Janeway. They were able to overcome this, and obviously they were always going to. That was never in question. But it was a fun ride while it lasted, and while I wouldn't necessarily say that this was the perfect way to begin a new season of a show, especially this far into it, I think had this been maybe in the middle of the season, I would have liked it slightly better. But all that being said, I really did actually enjoy the episode, and it was a fun time. The end of this episode introduced us to a Klingon ship, and we spent a decent amount of time there, only to have them destroyed by this mysterious overarching enemy.
That's impossible!
Although I'm not entirely sure they're actually going to turn out to be bad guys, but we'll have to see how and why that plays into things. How do you feel about this? Are you guys fans of Lower Decks? Did you like this episode? Are you even a fan of Voyager? I'm sure I missed a lot of little tidbits and callbacks and Easter eggs in here, but I didn't want to go through all of them. Just wanted to give my off-the-cuff thoughts on this episode in and of itself. Leave all your thoughts below. Like, share, subscribe, do all the fancy YouTube things. I'll be releasing a similar video to this second episode when I've seen that. But until next time...
Surrender now, and I will be merciful.